study of the entire Men in Black mystery. I'm sure a lot of people, their sort of first perceptions are sort of based around, the Men in Black movies with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. Not realizing, certainly as far as the general public's concerned, but many of them just aren't aware or realize that as people in the UFO field will know, that the movie itself was sort of inspired by real life reports of encounters with the Men in Black, which are, described as these sort of dark-suited, sinister characters who go around silencing and menacing people in the UFO field and, have done for, sort of 60-something years. So what I tried to do with the book was, sort of present the history of the phenomenon and demonstrate, various cases that, point in various different directions as to who they might be, and also demonstrate it's very much an ongoing mystery. It's not, as a lot of people think, just something, from the 40s or the 50s. It's still very much happening today.
Now, is this phenomenon, do you think, alien, or is it like in the movie where it's, humans that are just government workers? What do you think really is going on here, Nick?
Well, I think one of the interesting things, Angel, about the whole Men in Black mystery is I actually don't think there's just one category of Men in Black. I think there could be several things going on. And, in the book, I think I include like 5 or 6 different theories that people have presented, as to who they might be. Now, in terms of, when you talk about the movies then, there's absolutely no doubt, that some Men in Black reports can be traced back to government agencies. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And, certainly back in the 40s and 50s, government agencies like the FBI, they were dressed in sort of the black suit and the fedora-type hat. And so in that respect, I'm sure that's where at least part of the, sort of the mythology behind the reality, if you like, has stemmed from. But there's also like a weirder category of Men in Black as well, where the witnesses describe them as looking sort of very, very strange. They're sort of, only about 5 to 5'5" tall, very pale skinned, almost, anorexic looking, and they don't seem fully conversant with our mannerisms and, ways, etc. And people describe them as having this particular type of MIB, wearing these large wraparound sunglasses. And then when they kind of see them up close and they kind of peer at these sunglasses, it looks like they've got either oddly spaced or in some cases like bulging eyes, as one witness described them as like thyroid eyes. So in other words, this category seems independent from the government angle. And there's actually a number of files that have surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act where government agencies like the FBI and the Air Force had issued memos in the 50s and 60s ordering their agents to find out who these weirder Men in Black were, because even the government didn't seem to know. So that kind of suggests there are like several branches, if you like, of MIB.
Yeah, and in the book you also touch on the fact that they could be time travelers also. That's a possibility as well. So yeah, really there's no one classification of what the MIBs are. Now there's also a reference to women in black. Are there reports of women also be seen, or that are seen dressed in black, and how many reports of that we've had over the years? Yeah,
that's an aspect, I guess, that most people don't have any knowledge of. The idea,
right?
But it's I guess it's logical. Why would it just be Men in Black? Why would you not have women in black?
Right.
And certainly the number of reports that we have on file are less. But the interesting thing is they kind of follow the exact same path, if you like. Where I'll give you an example. I've done a number of expeditions to Puerto Rico looking for the chupacabra. And when I went there in 2005 with a friend of mine from Canada, a filmmaker named Paul Kimball, one of the people we interviewed was a rancher whose animals had been attacked by some sort of weird creature and drained of blood, etc. And the following day after these attacks occurred, he said that a man and a woman turned up. Bear in mind, he lived on like a small farm out in the middle of, pretty much like on the fringes of the El Yunque rainforest in Puerto Rico. So very much like a rural little village type area. And he said this man and woman turned up, both in black suits. He was in sort of black suit and tie. She was in like a black, businesswoman suit, that sort of thing. And they were very sort of cold and unemotional, pale looking. And bear in mind, this is Puerto Rico. It was like 100 degrees. This was the height of the summer. And they literally turned up on his doorstep in these black suits, not showing any evidence of sweating or... Then there was no car there either. That was the weird thing. It was like they'd sort of just appeared or, out of nowhere. And she looked just like him. She was like pale, skinny, and didn't smile. And they asked all these sorts of questions about the attacks on the farmers' animals and, what did he think of it. And then they just, when they were satisfied, they got all the answers. They just turned around and left and literally just walked out of off his property, and just the last he saw of him, they were just walking towards a little village that he lived in. And that's just like one example.
That's amazing.
But the Women in Black reports, in that respect, they're pretty much identical to the Men in Black stories.
Now, let me ask you: Are the Men in Black or Women in Black seen in other cases other than anything related to ufology, like in ghostly activities or anything like that, or is it all mostly related to UFO cases?
No, it actually isn't. I mean, I would say the majority of the reported cases that we have deal with some aspect of the UFO phenomenon, whether it's like a UFO sighting or, the person has been involved in abductions or something like that. But there are cases on record. I mean, I guess the most famous sort of non-directly UFO-related event in which the MIB was seen was in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the mid-'60s at the height of the Mothman sightings. Now, some people have said, well, Mothman is directly connected with UFOs. Other people have said, it's more like a paranormal creature, described as like this shadowy, glowing-eyed winged creature that turned up in Point Pleasant in the 60s, and the sightings culminated with the collapse of the Silver Bridge in the town, which collapsed into the Ohio River, literally killing dozens of people who were stuck on the bridge at the time. And, some people sort of see Mothman's presence as having been the cause of the deaths, if you like, and others sort of view Mothman as like a warning figure that turns up when disasters are about to happen and kind of tries to warn people. But regardless of which, scenario or theory is correct, or if it's even a combination of the two, the interesting thing is that when the Mothman sightings were at their height in Point Pleasant, the Men in Black were running around too, and Mothman witnesses were being silenced, or, they'd look out the window late at night and see these sort of two black dressed guys under the local street lamp with these fedora hats on, just staring at their house, like at midnight or whatever. And that it was clear there was some sort of intimidation of Mothman witnesses going on. And in some cases, in one case particularly, a local journalist who got intimidated and visited late one night by the Men in Black after writing about UFO encounters and Mothman sightings in the area. So for some reason, they don't just turn up with respect to UFOs. There have also been Men in Black encounters at Loch Ness in Scotland, of all places. I actually include one of these cases in the book where a researcher named Ted Holliday who'd spent a lot of time at the loch investigating these monster sightings. Mm-hmm. And he actually came round to believing after a while that rather than just being flesh and blood animals, there was something weirder about them, that they were almost paranormal-like. That's how he came to view them. And he was at the loch one day and said he saw this, or he had this feeling that somebody was watching him, and he turned round and he said that there was this sort of menacing Man in Black character just malevolently staring at him, who literally just vanished. And like a year later, when he was back at the loch at the exact same place, he actually had a serious heart attack in the very same location where the Man in Black was seen the year before. So that cases like this kind of have more of like a paranormal overtone to them, where the Men in Black, get involved in all sorts of things that go sort of far beyond just UFO sightings or whatever.
Now, has anybody that's been a witness to a Men in Black reported any missing memory or anything like that, of that nature?
No, you mean like in the films as such?
Right, like, when there's an alien abduction, you have missing memory sometimes. Has there been any reports that people have remembered seeing a Men in Black and they have like 3 or 4 hours of missing memory, they don't know what happened to them? Has that ever been reported?
That hasn't been reported, to the best of my knowledge anyway, but what I can tell you has been reported is that in many cases of Men in Black encounters, they typically occur at night where somebody, just watching TV or even in bed, and the doorbell will ring or there'll be a loud thump at the door at, like 10:30, 11. If somebody knocks on your door that time of night, you think, well, who on earth's that? Is it the police in bad news or something? That's probably most people's first thought. And so they go to the door and they answer the door, and there's these three guys stood there in the suits, the hats, looking like something straight out of a 1950s gangster movie or whatever. And when you talk about, missing time and memories screen or whatever, we don't get that. But what we find is that it's almost like the Men in Black do take some sort of control over the witnesses because, when they open the door, it's like common sense and their free will is almost sort of goes out the window because they invite them in. They ask, they say, well, the Men in Black say something like, we've come to speak to you about, the unusual encounter you had last week or whatever, something like that. And the person just lets them in, and sits them down, and then, the Men in Black start asking questions, grilling them and interrogating them. And the person just answers the questions. When the MIB are satisfied, they get up and leave. And it's only when the MIB have gone that then it's almost like common sense comes back to them and they start to return to a normal state of mind. They think, why did I let them in? Why didn't I ask for ID? It's almost like the sort of things you would do normally under any other circumstances. It's kind of like, although the memories aren't wiped, but it's almost as if they were almost hypnotized in some respects.
Right, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
It is almost like a hypnosis. It takes right over them as soon as they are face to face with the Men in Black or whoever these beings are. Now, Brett Steiger wrote talked a lot about Men in Black. In the book, you have a whole section on Brett Steiger's tale from the 60s. Let's touch upon that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I know Brad quite well, and because I knew that he'd had a number of Men in Black encounters given to him and stories related to him, I thought, he'd be the ideal person to interview because he was somebody who was, around in that period, in the early 60s onwards, when the sightings largely sort of began in the early 50s and then tailed off in the latter part of the 50s and then started to pick up again in the 60s, and that was when Brad was sort of really began to become a big player on the scene. And he told me of a number of stories, and what was interesting is that the people who had been visited were often witnesses who, were, in some cases, were even friends of Brad, and they were sort of threatening Brad, like through a secondary source. They were almost like telling Brad's friends, tell Brad or tell Steiger, we're going to visit him at Christmas time. That's one of the stories that a Man in Black gave to a friend of his. What happened was that this friend of Brad's was on holiday in London, and it was, just doing the whole tourist thing around London. And he said that, everywhere he went, he would see this group of these sort of small, 5'5" men in black. And he said they had these oddly shaped eyes, and they seemed to be following him all over the place. And one night when he was back at his apartment, he said that he looked out the window, and they were under the street lamp just looking up. And then the next day, they actually approached him, and this is when one of them said, "You're a friend of Brad Steiger. Tell him that we'll be visiting him at Christmas time." And which sounds kind of ominous. No, Brad didn't get a visit, but it was interesting that people were sort of by default, sort of through, friend of a friend, were kind of trying to intimidate him. And Brad told me a very interesting story about how on one occasion when he met with with John Keel, John who wrote the Mothman Prophecies book on which the film was based. And
the film was based, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean John Keel, was author of a number of sort of classic books like Operation Trojan Horse and titles like that. Mm-hmm. And Keel confided in Brad, and Brad said he didn't think Keel was, sort of telling a story or making a joke or anything like that. He said he came across as very serious and very worried, and Keel confided in Steiger. He said that on one night, he said, 3 of these Men in Black literally, kind of like spectral Men in Black, literally sort of manifested through the woodwork of the front door, literally kind of like semi-transparent, and, just entered the house or the apartment. And again, there was like a veiled warning to get out of Men in Black research. And again, these Men in Black come across more like almost like a paranormal type thing that literally, as I said, manifested through the door. And, Keel, if you read his work, he was pretty obsessed with the Men in Black mystery. If you read his books, and, they turn up in pretty much all the books he wrote. And I think, in that respect, this particular event, although this is just my personal opinion, I think that event must have been sort of so traumatic and weird for him that it kind of really caused him to have an obsession with the phenomenon, because it had really kind of got its grips into him as well by, appearing in his house, so to speak.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but there been UFO or alien abduction reports where they claim the aliens walk through walls as well?
Yeah, there are. There's a lot of stories like that where, they don't seem limited by our normal sort of physical, 3D world.
Right.
I mean, how that would be, that's a bigger question. But, there's absolutely no doubt, though, that we get this in not just Men in Black reports. We get it in a number of abduction cases, where even the person has said that they've been, sort of transported through the wall as if matter and reality somehow being manipulated to allow them to get out of the house. So.
Now, Nick, is there any concrete evidence? Like, is there any evidence that we could look at that is just concrete evidence to prove the whole Men in Black phenomenon, or is there really we don't have anything that we could label like the smoking gun?
Well, I'd say the closest thing that we have to a smoking gun. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Air Force and the FBI had issued memos trying to find out who the Men in Black were, and they couldn't get to the bottom of the mystery of the weirder ones. For the most part, we're sort of reliant on witness testimony, which is good, because without the witnesses, we don't have anybody to talk to. But in a few cases, we actually have photographs of people who've taken pictures of Men in Black. And I include a couple of these in the book. One of them was a photograph taken in 1968 by a man named Timothy Green Beckley, who's still involved in the UFO scene today and writes a lot of books still, even now. And the story was that it goes back, as I said, to 1968. And in Jersey City at the time, there was a husband and wife team of UFO researchers, paranormal researchers, named Jack and Mary Robinson. And on one occasion in '68, when when Jack was involved in a lot of high-profile UFO investigations in the area, he began to seem to be targeted by the Men in Black. And on one occasion, Jack and Mary went out for dinner and got home, and it looked like somebody had been in the house and had been going through his UFO files. Things were out of place, and he had a place for everything, and it was clear that stuff had been moved and tampered with. And this coincided with a few days later when Jack would go off to work in the morning, and Mary was a housewife at home, and she looked out the window one morning like 8:30, and there was this, again, one of these weird enigmatic Men in Black staring up from the recesses of the doorway of the old building opposite their apartment. And she said he had this kind of almost like a menacing look on his face. It was sort of like a cold, emotionless zombie kind of expression, and he was, he's wearing the typical Men in Black costume, so to speak, and just stared, in a threatening fashion. That's how she perceived it. And what was interesting is that although in most Men in Black cases, it's a random event, the person gets the visit and then they never see him again. But for 4 mornings afterwards, this MIB was there every morning, just staring up. And so in that respect, there was a potential to sort of catch the guy, I suppose, and Mary recognized this. So what she did, she phoned Timothy Green Beckley, who lived in New York at the time, not that far away, and explained to him that because Tim had been researching the Men in Black, it was like, well, this guy's been here now for a few days. Maybe he'll be there tomorrow. Why don't you come over? So Tim contacted another friend who lived locally, Jim Mosley, and who's also still involved in UFOs today. And Tim and Jim drove over like 8 o'clock on a weekday morning to Jersey City, and sure enough, the guy was there in the doorway again, just sort of eerily staring up at the Robinsons' apartment. And so Jim, bear in mind this was sort of the rush hour early traffic, in the city, so they couldn't stop, but they slowed the car right down. And Tim leaned out and took a photograph, and which he was good enough to let me use it in the book, and it shows, the guy with the hat, with the sunglasses, with the like a long black trench coat on, and just sort of staring, just sort of totally had this sort of blank expression on his face, just staring out. So in that respect, that's probably the closest that we have to, sort of a smoking gun type scenario in terms of, evidence for the sightings. In this case, although it's only a photograph, we can verify that, Mary was seeing someone, and it did coincide with, at the same time, when it seems somebody being in the house, and the Robinsons were involved in a lot of high-profile UFO cases. So, in that respect, that makes the tie-in interesting, if you like.
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture now, and it definitely has a creepy vibe to the way he's...
Yeah, it's difficult to explain why it's a bit creepy, but he just looks totally blank almost. Just sort of...
Yeah, he does.
It's like,
It's like he's a watcher.
Yeah, it's like if you imagine, you take a picture on your average street, say in New York or somewhere, everybody's walking down the street, somebody's on a cell phone, somebody's, I don't know, eating a sandwich, who knows what. But he's just stood there, just staring, like like a statue or something.
Now, this was reported for days, right? This took place over a couple of days. They saw this person.
Oh yeah, I mean that's why it was so easy for. Well, I say easy, but that's why it was why Jim decided and Tim decided to go out there, because it's very, very rarely that people get return visits, if you like, from the Men in Black, and this is one thing that really sort of makes this particular case stand out. It's if you imagine that you get the visit at 10 o'clock on a Friday night or something, and then they're gone, and you wait 2 or 3 days to tell someone, and they never come back, no matter how credible the witness is, and, everybody I've spoken to, comes across as credible. But unfortunately, from, verifying the story, when the trail's gone cold, and they don't come back, then it's difficult to, to find out how we pursued them. Where do we go to look for them? Where did they go when they left the witness? And that's the problem. So, but in this case, that this was very different, and as to why it was different, that's the big question. We just don't really know. So.
And this took place back in 1968. Now it's 2011. With mobile devices and everybody having 8 megapixels on their cell phones, I'm surprised that more pictures haven't come out of people just snapping photographs of the Men in Black, or just observing them or whatever. Kind of surprised that more people haven't released photographs like that, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it is, but I mean, on the other hand, it's whether or not people recognize, that they are Men in Black. I mean, for example, a lot of people who have UFO experiences, they're not necessarily beforehand in the UFO field, so they're not aware of, the history and the lore of it, so to speak. So let's say, I don't know, Mr. Jones sees a UFO late one night, and then somebody comes knocking on the door the following day and, asks a few weird questions. He may think, well, yeah, I told somebody at work, and then maybe they told somebody else, and he's just some guy who's interested and decided to come round and ask, but not make the connection that it's, one of those Men in Black, so, doesn't feel the need to take a picture or whatever. I think that could happen in some cases, where people just don't make the direct connection, so to speak. Or they have a UFO experience, and then they go to work the next day, they pull out the drive, and there's a guy in a black suit stood over the road. Me and you might make this, we probably would make the association, but they might not think anything of it, so there's no reason to get the picture, I suppose.
Now, who's Claudia Cunningham? Because in the book here, you have a section where she claims that she believes that the Men in Black have demonic origins.
Yeah, well, this is one of the, again, the interesting and also sort of ominous and sinister theories about the Men in Black is that, that people, the angles that most people focus on are that it's either government people or some sort of alien entity, or possibly, those are the two categories. There's two categories at least. But other people have taken the view that, possibly they're like supernatural or paranormal or even demonic. It depends how you kind of, I guess sort of link all those different types of theories. But that's actually one of the more prevalent ideas as well. And Claudia was a woman who I interviewed because her case was significant because it actually only occurred in 2009, so it's a very, very recent case. And she had a friend named Linda, still does have a friend named Linda, who didn't live too far from the Albany Cemetery in New York. And the Albany Cemetery is like a huge place, and people, I know it sounds strange, but they go there, sometimes just to hang out. It's like a tranquil, huge, picturesque cemetery.
That is a little strange.
It is a bit strange, but people do that. And she went there one day and saw this sort of like a typical, had a Man in Black experience, like this black car. And, this is something, again, that's one of the particular aspects of the Men in Black. They drive sometimes old black cars that look like they come straight out, the 1950s, or sort of a modern-day version, but they're always totally black with blacked-out windows as well often. And Linda saw this car and this sort of sinister man, again, had this sort of weird expression on his face, as in the case involving Timothy Beckley in 1968. And Linda told Claudia about this because both Linda was heavily involved in paranormal stuff and used to use Ouija boards and all sorts of things. And she knew that Claudia was interested in UFOs and stuff and called her up and said, hey, I think I've seen one of these Men in Black. And Claudia, found this fascinating. And she thought, well, if only I could see one of these. And sure enough, it was sort of almost a case of be careful what you ask for, because a couple of days later she was out shopping at a local store, came out the store, and there was this large black car parked next to hers. And again, this weird-looking Man in Black black suit, and even a black hat. You don't see many guys wearing black hats today. And again, he had this sort of weird, knowing smile, and Claudia said it was kind of a smile where she felt it was along the lines of that he really had said to her, be careful what you ask for. And the association with the fact that, the original sighting that kind of kicked it all off happened at the cemetery, and Linda was used Ouija boards, and a number of other people who've had Men in Black experiences were also users of Ouija boards. It was this kind of thing that convinced Claudia that, we're not dealing with extraterrestrials, that we're dealing with something more paranormal or supernatural. Like an occult-based thing that tries to get its grips into us, like through a form of deception, like a demonic deception that masquerades as, alien almost. And it's a controversial theory, but it's a subject or a theory that does have a lot of followers.
Now, not to sound like I'm ridiculing them or anything, but is there any reports of any drug use at all at these cemetery parties that these people were attending? This is a little odd to hang out at a cemetery of all places, but was there any LSD at all used in these parties?
Well, not in this case, no. But there are reports on record where people have used like psychedelic drugs, like LSD, and they felt, that they've opened, their mind to like a portal or a doorway, but it's, to another realm. Rather than just literally, people talk about, for example, DMT. DMT is actually a naturally occurring substance in the body, but if it's synthesized and it can actually induce like images in the mind of other entities, strange-looking creatures that seem to want to commune with us. And a number of researchers who've looked into this feel that although DMT provokes like a psychedelic hallucinogenic experience, a lot of researchers now don't believe it's hallucinogenic. They feel that some of these drugs can literally open sort of portals or doorways to other realms of existence that coexist with us. So in other words, we do have reports of people using psychedelics and having Men in Black experiences, but the theory is, they're not just imagining it, that maybe, you open a door and it stays open long enough to where these entities on the other side, it's like you pop up on their radar and then they come through and, start menacing you then.
Well, that kind of makes sense because, at the end of the day, what are we if not energy, correct? And
Yeah.
when you're in one of those states, your energy can wander. And, to me, energy is the soul.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody likes to, wonder what the soul is. To me, your energy, your life force, that is your soul, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's the best way I can interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes perfect sense that the energy, if you're using a kind of, drug like DMT, might be able to tap into other universes, other dimensions.
Yeah, and I mean,
it is possible. I've heard a lot of stuff on that, on DMT, and
yeah, and I mean, one of the interesting things is that a lot of people who've had the Men in Black experience, when you talk about it as being energy, a lot of people have said that after the experience, they've kind of felt drained of energy, as if these things are almost like a psychic vampire that feeds on literally on human energy. Some people have said they felt like a diabetic must feel, if they miss a meal or whatever, they start to crash.
Right.
And we actually have a number of reports like that on record where the MIB literally do sound, like they're parasitic entities just feeding on like the human life force in some respect.
Now, for how long has the Men in Black phenomenon been going on? For how long have we known of this phenomenon?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of the modern era, we're talking about early 50s. Actually, the interesting thing, it doesn't really tie in with the very early beginnings, with Kenneth Arnold in 1947. It pretty much kicks off with a man named Albert Bender in the early 50s who set up a UFO group in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where he lived, called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. And Bender set this group up, and it became a very huge group, and actually had strands in Australia and England, all over the place. And what made it even more weird was that within a year of it becoming very successful, Bender closed it down amid these stories about having been visited and terrorized by these three weird men in black. And in Bender's own words, they weren't like government people. They kind of, again, materialized in his room when he was in almost like some altered state of mind. I mean, even by Bender's own admission, he said he could never be sure he was sort of fully awake or in some, sort of half awake, half, almost kind of like a hypnotized state or an altered state of mind. And the Men in Black would kind of appear as they did for John Keel, as if, like a semi-awake sleep state, but not where you were dreaming or daydreaming, but where your mind had been rendered into some sort of altered perception and that allowed you almost to see the Men in Black. But in terms of whether it could be an older phenomenon, what's interesting is there are a lot of parallels between the Men in Black cases today and centuries-old reports of vampires. For example, one of the little-known things about the Men in Black is that if they knock on the front door, late at night, they never barge their way in. They never force their way in. They stand there patiently, just waiting for the person to let them in. Now, that's a classic example of vampire law, where the vampire in history won't enter your house until you're invited in. Again, that's like a classic aspect of that as well.
It's a vampire, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, for our, us movie buffs, the movie Fright Night, they just came out this past weekend, is a remake, of course, of the 1980s Fright Night, which is a vampire movie. And part of the mythology in that movie is that they have to be invited into the house to be able to come into the house. If not, the vampire can't come into the house. So yeah, that mythology's been around for a long time. You're right.
Yeah, and on top of that, when people have talked about the Men in Black kind of draining them of energy, that's kind of similar to the legends of people being drained of energy via, the Men in Black taking their blood. In vampire legend, they almost become like anemic because, they haven't got enough blood left. And even the clothing. Today it's like black suits and trench coats. 200 years ago, it was black cloaks, but still black clothes. And today they turn up in black cars. Sometimes in vampire legend, they would turn up on a black horse, I should say. So, it's kind of like, is there that much difference between an energy-sucking man in black today that has to be invited in and a black cloak vampire that sucks blood and needs to be invited into the house? It's one of the things I theorize in the book is whether or not some of these ancient vampire legends may have been sort of based around centuries-old encounters with the Men in Black. If the Men in Black were turning up today, and silencing people involved in paranormal realms, which they clearly are, not just UFOs, then maybe they were doing the same thing with paranormal researchers or people who'd had ghostly experiences 200 years ago, and it was just, that the UFO phenomenon is sort of seen as the thing today in which their main focus of attention, but maybe 200, 300 years ago it was something else.
Or maybe they actually were vampires.
Well, maybe they were, it's interesting that, it depends how you define what a vampire is, is it really one of the undead come back to life, or is that, the folkloric perception, but, maybe the MIB and vampires, whatever they are one and the same, perhaps it's just folkloric and cultural perception, how it changes over the years that, has sort of led to the rise and development of different scenarios or ideas for what it is.
Now, the book also touches on the hoaxers within the Men in Black phenomenon. Let's talk about that a little bit. Has there been a lot of hoaxing in the Men in Black phenomenon that we know about that are clear-cut hoaxes?
Yeah, there haven't been many. There are some cases where, there seem to be more. For example, there was a guy named Gray Barker. Gray Barker was one of the early Men in Black researchers, and he was also an author. He's a very good author, but he used a lot of imaginative scenarios to tell a story. In other words, he wasn't a liar or anything like that, but he would often kind of, sort of change a story, to point out in the book, where a sighting, if it occurred in the daytime or involved in the Men in Black, he'd change it to the proverbial dark and stormy night, when the MIB turned up. But he would, he wouldn't do it from the perspective of lying. It was, if you read his work, it was more along the lines of and this is how the researchers who are still around today who knew him also sort of view it, that he was trying to get across scenarios and viewpoints, very real ones, but he felt that, to tell it in a captivating sort of semi-fictional way would...
He spiced it up a little bit.
He spiced it up, and he felt it would kind of, sort of expand the person's mind more than have it sort of just a sort of a dull, straightforward telling. Now, of course, if you do that, inevitably some people are going to say, well, that's making it up or hoaxing. But, which on the one hand it is, but on the other hand, he was using real cases and real events, but telling it in kind of like a semi-fictionalized story. So, we don't get many, as far as I can tell, outright hoaxes, but there have been things like this where we've had distortions in some cases. And as I openly point out in the book, this is one of the things that makes the mystery even more difficult to resolve, because there are some cases where, people, researchers have stretched the truth or whatever, and, but if we recognize that and we kind of realize how and why it was done, at least we can kind of, have an understanding of that. And, another example, this isn't a case of hoaxing, but one of the people I interviewed for the book was a guy named Micah Hanks. Micah lives in Asheville, North Carolina, and he does a lot of paranormal research, across the board, UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, all sorts of things. And there's a famous hotel, very sort of upscale hotel in Asheville where Micah lives, and it has a lot of ghostly stories attached to it. And so Micah would often go out there, as a ghost hunter, and like on a Saturday night, and he'd take all his ghost hunting equipment, and he'd roam the corridors of the hotel, and trying to see if there was like sort of cold spots. And, exactly like that. And he said because it was sort of an upmarket hotel, he always felt he needed to put like a suit and tie on. And he said that after a while, stories began to sort of circulate in town about this man in black roaming the corridors at the hotel with all these weird gadgets. And Micah heard these stories. He thought, well, hang on, that doesn't just sound familiar. Then he realized that people were actually talking about him. People had seen him, and the stories were getting around that it was a man in black. And
right.
Now, this wasn't obviously a case of hoaxing. It was just a case of Micah thinking, oh, well, I'll put a suit on when I go out and do these ghost investigations in the hotel.
And of course, you had to wear a black suit.
Yeah, that's exactly what he did. So, I think it's interesting that, we have these cases where, again, we need to be careful that in some cases we have real Men in Black events. Others do sometimes have a prosaic explanation, but it's still all part of the mystery, I think, and the folklore, and the challenge is to determine which cases fall into this category and which ones fall into that category. There's a tendency to think, all Men in Black reports are one category. They're clearly not, as these cases, all demonstrate. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been so difficult to resolve it, because purely and simply because there isn't just one thing going on. So.
Yeah, there's definitely a multifaceted level of different things going on here with the Men in Black phenomenon.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Listen, guys, we're listening to Mr. Nick Redfern, the author of The Real Men in Black, the book, and really a great read. It really is, Nick. It really is a great book. We're going to go on a quick commercial break here in a second, but Nick, on the book here at the very end, where it says about the author, and I'm going to ask you a question here before we go on break, and then I want to get your answer when we return from break. But it says here that you are an author who writes about a wide range of different unsolved mysteries, including Bigfoot, UFOs, Loch Ness monsters, alien encounters, government conspiracies, and you read about, of course, the Men in Black and all kinds of different things. My question to you is, to this date, what is the most, what's the most favorite topic you have that you've written about? Because you have a wide range of different things you cover or have covered already. So we'll take your answer on that when we return back from break, Nick.
All right.
And Mr. Nick Redfern. And it is such an amazing topic, the Men in Black phenomenon. It really is. And, of course, it's one that, like we said, has been going around for at least now, conservatively, at least 60 years, let's just say, that we know of. Because, that's a conservative number, you would say. About 60 years, 65 years.
Well,
but
there are a few earlier.
It could be a lot older than that.
Yeah.
It could be a lot older than that, right, Nick?
Yeah, it could be. I think, one of the problems is, of course, that before the 50s, the term Men in Black didn't exist. So, in other words, people probably may not have, made the connection. Say, for example, if you saw a UFO 100 years ago and some, black-suited person turned up or whatever, they wouldn't necessarily make a connection between the two things. And I think, that's
Correct.
something that really sort of dictates to when we suggest a phenomenon started or didn't start. It's kind of just... It's difficult to know, unless people make the connection and tell us, then we don't realize there's a connection with an older story or whatever. So.
Now, Nick, before we went to commercial there, we left off with a question. I wanted to know what your favorite topic is that you've covered so far in all the books you've written, because, again, you do have a wide range of topics you've covered, everything from the Loch Ness Monster to Bigfoot, UFOs, the Men in Black. I mean, on and on and on. What's your favorite topic to talk about or cover in these books?
Well, I enjoy probably the cryptozoology most of all. Cryptozoology being the study of unknown animals, whether it's Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, Ogopogo, the skunk ape, chupacabra, you name it. And I think one of the main reasons why is, I enjoy the fact that it's sort of, you're going out on an expedition for the most part. I enjoy don't get me wrong, I enjoy the UFO stuff, but it's very much often, sort of retrospective where you're just sort of doing interviews, or you're going through government files, or you're researching an old case which is very interesting, but it's not sort of that immediate and, ongoing. Now, of course, somebody says they've seen Bigfoot, or there's been a new lake monster sighting or something like that, then, particularly if it's something like a lake, well then, you can get out to that area, and if it's a landlocked lake, then the chances are that if there's something there, you may get to see it again, or, if you're able to stay there long enough. UFO sightings are interesting, but they're kind of random. They're here, then they're gone. If you've got something living in a particular lake, you actually have a good chance of possibly finding it or finding some evidence. And, so I enjoy that. I kind of enjoy the sort of the road trip aspect of doing, this sort of strange creature investigation.
Yeah, I guess really when it comes to UFOs or those kind of conspiracies, the only kind of road trip you could take is maybe going out to Area 51 or something like that, and trying to catch some lights. That's really about it. I mean, other than that, you're absolutely right. There really isn't so much on-field investigation you could do where you can actually see something or have that chance at least.
Yeah.
Now, have you actually researched in, say, the Loch Ness Monster case? Has there been any reported, new evidence in the last few years that actually is concrete?
Well, I mean, and certainly we still have our ongoing witness reports. We still get photographs. So whatever the phenomenon is, it's still ongoing. But one of the problems with Loch Ness, is not the fact that it's, a loch where, you can go investigate things, but it's so huge. People, because it's in Scotland, part of the British Isles, people think it's just a small loch. A lot of people go there quite surprised when they find out it's actually 22 miles long, just under a mile wide, and at its deepest point around 700 feet. So, you imagine leaving your house and driving for 22 miles, and you think that's the length of life. That's quite a long way, really. There's a large body of water, and if these creatures are, if they derive their oxygen from the water like a fish, they may not need to surface that often, and the water's very black due to the mud sliding down from the steep hills that surround the loch. So in that respect, the chances are it may not need to surface that often. It may surface out of curiosity rather than to breed. If these were like whales, coming up to breed, we'd be seeing them every 10 minutes, but we're not. So I think, if whatever they are, they would have to be some sort of flesh and blood animals. They'd have to be some sort of fish, that derives its oxygen from the water. Some people have wondered, could there be a form of giant eel? Might not be as exciting as a surviving dinosaur, but, if 30-foot eel charges at you and it's got a body the size of an oil drum, you're probably not going to quibble as to whether or not it's a monster, So, but things like this, we still get ongoing reports and sightings and photographs. So I think there's something in the loch. It's obviously, people say the Loch Ness Monster. It sounds like just one creature swimming around for centuries, which, is just impossible.
Many of them.
It would have to be like a colony of creatures or something like that. But again, I think the fact that we don't have a corpse could be explained by the fact that, if they live in the water, they're going to die in the water. And, nature takes care of things when something dies in the sea or even in the woods. The other smaller animals feed on it. It's very rarely you find corpses, or even if you do, they don't last for long, So.
That's very true. And in the Bigfoot phenomenon, would that also, you think, be a reason why we haven't ever found a corpse or a body? Because there's never been really any physical evidence as well. Do you think it's because maybe once they die, the animals in nature itself just they go at it and they feed on the dead carcass?
Yeah, well, I mean that's certainly one of the theories for it. I mean, when it comes to Bigfoot, I'm kind of at odds with some of the other people in the sort of monster hunting community, because I don't shy away from the fact that there are a number of Bigfoot reports which are very weird, that kind of seem to take it away from just being, an unknown ape or whatever. We get reports of sort of paranormal overtones tied to Bigfoot in the same way that we do with the Men in Black. For example, there are people, seeing Bigfoot sort of vanish in a flash of light, or footprints in the snow that have just come to an end as if the creature's vanished. There are reports of people trying to shoot it for the bullets to have no effect, and again, it's sort of vanished. People have tried to photograph it in some cases, and the photographs have come out fogged, or the camera's jammed at the crucial moment. So, in that respect, a lot of cryptozoologists, who I'm friends with, but we just disagree, they just view it as an unknown ape, and, they're like, no, there's no way that this could happen, this is just an unclassified animal, which it might be. But that, if you're going to write off the weirder cases, you're actually writing off sort of 10, 15% of all reports, that do seem to have this sort of high strangeness aspect attached to them as well. So.
Yeah, but Nick, I mean, on 2011, what are the odds that really there is some unknown ape walking around, that looks almost humanoid, that we have never seen?
Well, this is a big thing where, again, one of the reasons why I'm at odds when people say it's just an unclassified ape. I mean, me and my wife live in Dallas, and I can be 90 minutes from here. I can be in prime Bigfoot territory. There's a lot of heavily wooded area in Texas, and I literally only have to drive 90 minutes from our house just outside Dallas to be there. And the idea that there could be colonies of sort of 7 to 8 foot tall apes living only a 90-minute drive from Dallas and never be caught. This is one of the issues that even I recognize is problematic, in terms of trying to understand.
Well, no, out of Dallas, I can certainly believe it. Bunch of apes living out of Dallas.
Yeah. But, it's the same in the Pacific Northwest, where we get a lot of reports. You know, you can be in Seattle. Seattle, you know, just a short drive from there, there's countless Bigfoot reports. But Bigfoot never gets hit by a car, never gets shot, you know, never dies and gets stumbled upon by anyone. So this is one of the reasons why I think, you know, Bigfoot isn't just weird. Bigfoot's like too weird. There's something about the phenomenon that goes beyond or less than just flesh and blood. I think it is more, however defined the paranormal or whatever, I think Bigfoot somehow falls into that category.
Huh. Yeah, you know, I'm a big skeptic on the whole Bigfoot, you know, phenomenon. Rick Osmond, who's one of the hosts here on the network, is really into the whole Bigfoot phenomenon. You've met Rick. I'm sure you've been on Unraveling the Secrets in the past. You know, he's a big proponent of the whole Bigfoot phenomenon. I personally, you know, I'm not too much of a believer, but it is amazing how much hoaxing has gone on in the Bigfoot field. I mean, wasn't there a couple guys a few years ago, or a couple years ago, or a year ago, who had a body in a freezer, and that whole thing blew up all over the media's face.
Yeah, I mean,
they were promoting the hell out of that.
Yeah, that was also one of the big black eyes of Bigfoot research in the last couple of years, you know, in the sense that for a while a number of people thought, wow, this is it, you know, we really do have the evidence, and that fell apart. And, you know, you can go on YouTube and you can find countless pieces of footage that people have loaded there in the last few years, you know, sort of shaky 15-second shots of something going through the woods. You know, it's just clearly a bunch of kids out, you know, one of them dresses up in a, you know, the mom's black coat or whatever, you know, and they get a few shaky out-of-focus pictures. So, you know, that's one of the problems is that when you do get hoaxing, it inevitably makes people think, well, if that's hoaxed, then this has got to be hoaxed as well. But, you know, I mean, I understand why people are skeptical, and, you know, I'm skeptical, totally skeptical of the idea that, you know, huge colonies could be all living all around the U.S. of these animals and never get caught. But I'm not skeptical of the existence of the phenomenon. I'm skeptical of the existence of just flesh and blood type Bigfoot. But when you look at the weirder aspects, that might go some way to explain how and why these things are so elusive, even though we don't really understand, you know, what might be at the heart of the paranormal aspect of Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's funny, the paranormal aspect of Bigfoot, but if you ever watch Harry and the Hendersons, it would be kind of neat to have a huge ape-like, you know, hairy giant just walking around. That'd be kind of neat.
Well, it would. I mean, who knows? You know, I mean, I think the big problem a lot of people don't think about, you know, it's like if you go to, say, for example, the Congo and you find, you know, like the silverback gorillas there, the amount of, you know, like the huge male with the so-called silverback, as they call it, the amount of food they have to eat every day, you know, it's like 45 pounds of food just to stay healthy.
Right.
Excuse me, 45 kilograms, you know, just to stay healthy.
That's a lot of pounds a day.
Yeah. So, you know, and in the U.S., the problem is that, you know, often Bigfoot is seen in locations where there isn't always a, you know, a huge food source. You know, we should be seeing, really, and there are reports of Bigfoot eating meat and fish, etc. So if this is a carnivore, or if it'll eat just anything, we really should see massive evidence of, you know, animals being taken every night from farms, or massive uprooting of vegetables and things like that. But it's almost like when people see Bigfoot eating, it's almost like it's staged to kind of create the image that it's a flesh and blood animal. I know that sounds strange, but it is often like it's a staged event, and the person is meant to sort of see Bigfoot catching a fish or whatever. You know, it's just very strange, as if, you know, that's somebody wants to get that image across, or something wants to get that image across.
But it's funny, you could say the same thing about a lot of other phenomenons, like the UFO phenomenon, for example. A lot of the UFO phenomenon, when you really think about it, a lot of the reports really seem, you know, even in the description, to be almost like staged events.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to particularly the 50s and the 60s, there were numerous reports where people would be, you know, out in the car driving down the road, and they'd suddenly see aliens, quote, taking soil samples at the side of the road. You know, it's almost like how many times do they need to take soil samples? You know, it's as if they were deliberately going out of the way to be seen and create this image of like alien scientists taking soil samples. You know, again, why would they play with us like that, or, you know, mess with our minds? I don't know, but you know, you can find throughout ufology cases where it seems almost too good to be true that the person was where they were at the time, and then something suddenly happened.
Nick, listen, we have a caller who's joining us with a question. 215, you're on the air with Nick Redfern, author of the book The Real Men in Black.
Hi, guys.
Question for our guest?
Yeah, I have a question about the Men in Black. I think a lot of people who are researching or studying UFOs or the paranormal or have anything more than a passing interest in those kinds of activities, or maybe certain listeners of the Jackal's Head often wonder if they might someday get an MIB visit of their own. And I was wondering, in your opinion, if they do come, should I cooperate with them?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I would say no, and I'll tell you for why you shouldn't cooperate with them, is that the Men in Black are sort of very good at intimidating people and frightening them. That's what, what the witnesses say. They felt intimidated and, as if they'd been backed into a corner and something bad was going to happen to them if they didn't go along with what they were told. But there are cases where people have literally said, no, get out of the house. And it's like when you do that, it's almost as if you're kind of upsetting their programming almost, to where many witnesses said the MIB just didn't seem to know what to do, that they were caught off guard, and they started stumbling and fumbling for words, and then just got up and made sort of a hasty retreat out of the house. So, in other words, a lot of it comes across almost like a stage play, like acting, where they have a script, and the script is to intimidate the witness, to get the information about the sighting off the witness that they want, and then to issue enough of a threat so that the witness, they hope, will stay silent. But if you kind of disrupt the program and, really catch them off guard, then you don't need to go along with what they say, because they literally make a hasty retreat. They leave, as if they just, so is it almost like someone's put a virus in the program and that,
a loophole.
Totally rework the situation.
I asked because
they all sound like the agents in the Matrix.
Oh, it's funny you should mention that, because the characters in the Matrix, the Hunting Neo, they do come across like Men in Black, and of course in the Matrix movie, the world as we see it, reality is kind of like a holographic, dreamlike world, and there's actually more than a few researchers who believe, there could be something to that, the idea that reality as we see it can be manipulated, and that, maybe that explains some of these weirder MIB things where they come and go and reality seems different for the person and their sort of self-will is taken away. Maybe, who knows, maybe we are living in somebody's idea of some vast computer program, and perhaps the Men in Black are, kind of, they come along to fix glitches in the system or whatever, the mainframe.
Well, see, that's the thing. I mean,
such an amazing movie.
If they were fixing glitches, that would be a good thing, right?
If they were what?
I mean,
not necessarily.
Hypothetically, I mean, well, my interest in their motivations has just always kind of changed. I mean, in the movie, like the Men in Black movie, for example, they seem like, the good guys, like they're just there to kind of help. But then, of course, in, reality, most of the reports make them kind of just sound like thugs meant to come and, threaten you and tell you to shut up about UFOs. Yeah, but I've got to admit that you've got me even more scared of them with this demon theory, because I've never heard this one before about the Men in Black, kind of like vampires.
Yeah, well, this is interesting. The more you dig into it, you find it gets really weird. I mean, one of the people I interviewed for the book was a guy named Ray Beauchesne, who's a former state director of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, but he's also an Anglican priest, and he's investigated a number of cases where people had sort of like violent poltergeist activity in the house in like the week or so after the Men in Black encounter, and they'd had sort of weird runs of bad luck and like ill health, as if like a malignant force had got its grips into them and had hung around even after the MIB experience had occurred. And as I mentioned earlier, a number of people who've had the encounters and visits have been heavy users of Ouija boards. Somebody might say, well, if you're into UFOs, somebody might be into ghosts, so they use Ouija boards, and maybe there's not a direct connection, right. But other people have suggested, that these aren't just, aliens or government people, but they're almost like, like a literally a demonic force. I mean, I point out in the book, I stress that the theories are, well, that's what exactly they are, they're theories. To a great extent, we're sort of still scrambling around for hard answers when it comes to this particular mystery. And I don't personally feel it's right to force a belief system on people as to what the MIB might be. I think it's better to demonstrate this is what the theories are, and this is what may be going on, and this is what this person thinks, and put all the data out, and then hopefully by doing that and not censoring any data, we may one day get a better understanding. So.
Well,
Sure. Thanks for calling in. Any other questions for our guest? We have to actually move on. We're almost running out of time here. Any other questions for Mr. Nick Redfern?
Yeah, I did want to ask another question if I could try and fit it in. Just what you think about theorizing in general in this field, because, I mean, one thing I've always respected about it is how, when you look at the people who are really into it and, not just a goose, how really scientific they are. Because a lot of them never ask you to believe in anything. They simply say, these are the facts that I've kind of uncovered, and this is my best guess as to the answer so far. But, I mean, it's something you can still kind of have fun with, too, right? I mean, you've got to, think out the theories and play with these ideas a little to let them evolve, right?
Oh, no, you're right. I agree with you. And I think, the big problem, of course, is that, people want respectability. They want to discuss theories and ideas, and it creates belief systems. But I think also people want to tread carefully so they don't kind of get burned if, they come up with a hypothesis or a theory and then, it's proven wrong or whatever. I think...
Right.
I think the most important thing, as I sort of mentioned earlier, are the eyewitnesses. Without the eyewitnesses, forget if you write books or you do this or you do whatever. If we haven't got the eyewitnesses, we've got nothing. They're the most important people. So I think the onus is on us, so to speak, to ensure that we follow what the witnesses say. We don't misinterpret their stories. And we put the data out and we validate it and, do what we have to do to investigate it and then just share the data. I think that's all the sort of responsible approach we can take, really.
Now, Nick, before we run out of time here, I do want to cover your chapter in the book, UFOs and Aliens, Is There Anybody Out There? The chapter was The Kingman Affair.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this chapter a little bit and, what exactly is the Kingman Affair? Tell us about the chapter. And it's a great book, by the way. I've had on several of the authors who participated in this book already on the show. Cool. Have a few more booked for the future. This is probably my favorite book within ufology that I've read in the last 5 years. Great book. Oh,
well, thanks. Well, this is a book that's put out by New Page Books, and they're doing a series of titles where they ask different authors to, submit an article, and they've done a ghost volume and a UFO volume, and then at the end of the year they've got an Ancient Mysteries volume coming out. And they asked me if I'd do a UFO chapter for this particular book, and I did one on a crashed UFO story from 1953 that reportedly occurred near Kingman, Arizona. And I'm sure everybody's listening to the show has heard of Roswell. Well, the Kingman story is kind of like that, some sort of object coming down and a strange body or bodies found out in the vicinity of the wreckage, and it's like a desert location, and the military moves in and silences everybody and removes the wreckage. And it's one of these cases that's what makes it interesting is it's kind of like a twofold thing. It's really kind of gone under a lot of people's radar in the sense it's never ever achieved the sort of profile that a case like Roswell has. But on the other hand, it's not just like a one-witness case. There are a lot of different strands to the story that I point out in the book where it seems different researchers have got hold of data on the case, from different witnesses' perspectives. And this is what keeps, for me, the case open. What makes it kind of confusing, as I point out in the book, is that the same location where the UFO crash occurred, we know that in the early 50s, the military was actually test flying remotely piloted drone aircraft with chimpanzees on board, and these were sort of involved in early atomic bomb tests. They were trying to determine if aircraft could be flown near to an atomic bomb mushroom cloud, and how would the pilot be affected by radiation if it was in a Third World War scenario. So they actually test flew remotely piloted drones through the mushroom clouds or close to them with monkeys on board. And these files have now been declassified. Wow. You can see them at the National Archives. And it's a strange story, putting like a chimpanzee in a plane and remotely piloting it in it. And there are stories, could one of these things have come down and sort of led to the crashed UFO legend. But then again, we have other credible people, like an elderly lady I interviewed who worked in the Pentagon in the 50s as a secretary, as a typist, and she had a secret clearance because, she had to type classified reports. And she said that, she's told me, I saw and had to type up, an updated report on a case involving a crashed UFO at Kingman. And she said, I saw the report, I saw the details, and I remember it to this day. So, cases like that, it's difficult to dismiss that type of story. So what I've tried to do anyway with that chapter is present all the data as it stands on Kingman and, put it all out there. And there's no doubt, it's a fascinating story that still deserves investigation almost sort of 60 years after whatever occurred did occur.
It's kind of funny, though, there would be UFO activity or reports of UFO activity near a nuclear explosion or, nuclear testing or whatever the testings were. It's kind of funny. It seems that more and more there is kind of reports of UFOs around nuclear sites or around, these kind of atomic testings.
Oh, yeah, you're right. We get a lot of that.
That's pretty interesting.
We get a lot of that.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's pretty interesting.
A number of reports on record, where UFOs have actually sort of scrambled the launch codes at nuclear missile silos where, missiles just cannot be launched. There's a number of cases like that. The Los Alamos laboratory, where the atomic bomb was developed in the late 40s, there was a whole wave from 48 to 49 of UFO activity all across the Los Alamos installation area. So clearly, I think something is taking an interest in our sort of atomic capabilities.
Nick, what do you think of Roswell? Do you think there was a ship that crashed at Roswell? Or do you think there's been more mythology and legend over a weather balloon?
Well, yeah, I think something came down, and I think, there's been a heavy, deep cover-up ever since. I don't buy the stories at all about weather balloons, mogul balloons, and crash test dummies. I think, I think it could go one of two ways. Either it was a genuine UFO with alien bodies, or the military was doing some sort of weird, dark and dubious experiments.
Right.
And I'm not, I think because, there was a lot of weird stuff going on in New Mexico at the time. A lot of German scientists were brought over to, undertake, when the war finished, through a program called Paperclip, where they're brought over and, doing all sorts of high-altitude exposure experiments on people and, missile flights and V-2 rocket tests with monkeys on board and things like this. But then again, when you listen to the witnesses who said they saw these strange bodies with oversized heads, it's difficult to how you reconcile that as a monkey. You know what I mean? So I think something weird and strange and possibly even otherworldly did occur at Roswell. I think the big problem is that the secret is buried so deeply. It's like, how do we get the answers? When the Air Force stands by its scenario of crash test dummies and balloons, and every other agency of government says, well, we've looked and we've got nothing. It's not like they're saying we won't release our files.
Right.
The official story is there's no files. It's kind of like, how do we, when everybody's getting to that age now where there aren't that many people left who are around, it's like, how do we really resolve it? And is it going to become, even though it's a real event, I think the danger is it could become almost like an American equivalent of, like, in Britain, Jack the Ripper. Where there's like a real mystery, but it's so old that it becomes almost part of folklore and tourism, because it's beyond the stage of being resolvable. And I think Roswell could be in danger of getting to that point. It's how do we take it any further?
It's been so many years now.
Yeah, it's like 64
years. So many
years.
Years now. I mean, how are you going to find out? Yeah, how are you going to find out exactly what happened?
I think the only way it could happen.
The eyewitnesses are dead.
Yeah, the only way I think it could happen would be if, say, a bunch of files were declassified by mistake, and one of those files contains even if it's just one-page document referencing what happened, And then that might blow open the doors for further research. So I think it could be like an alternative thing like that, like an error occurs in the government, and it makes the file surface, or it throws it, to another level.
Yeah, and that, and of course, something that's been happening more and more recently now is deathbed confessions.
Yeah.
Walter Haut, for example, who came forward. I mean, these folks have nothing to gain
you're
whatsoever
right.
By doing a deathbed confession. I mean, there's nothing to gain from it. He's dying. He's not going to make any money off of this thing. When Walter Haut, came out and with his confession, and that pretty much sealed the deal for me when it came to Roswell. I believe from that point on that yes, there is definitely some kind of alien activity that happened in 1947.
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. When you have military people who, they're in their 80s or whatever, that is the time, logically, that they probably would come forward and say, this is the story I have to tell. And, as I said, it's about when somebody talks about, seeing 3 or 4 strange bodies strewn around this craft, and, their large bald heads and, weird-looking eyes and 3 fingers or whatever, that's clearly not a chimpanzee, so,
right.
and it is difficult to write off these stories, and, I certainly don't. What I do think is responsible is to remain open-minded on the possibility that, it could be this or that. I'm not a Roswell debunker. I think it's important to be open-minded, and, I don't believe the government story at all. But equally, I think we need to sort of, rule out all other possibilities as well. That the government has done some weird stuff over the time.
Oh yeah, no, and not for nothing, because I'm to a point with the U.S. government that I laugh at every time they come out with a new excuse for what happened to Roswell, because it's been so many already over the years. First with the weather balloon, then with the dummies, and of course even their excuses have been debunked because the crash test dummies weren't being used to 1954.
Yeah, that's right. They even got the years wrong when they started the crash test dummy experiment. I mean, sometimes I actually wondered when the Air Force came out with this if they were trying to actually tell us that they didn't really know, and that were they trying to imply that somebody else in government was, by coming out with such a ridiculous scenario, were they trying to kind of almost like, tell us not in an underhanded way, but like a covert way, tell us that, well, somebody else must be hiding it. We've looked for it. We know this sounds crazy, but this is the only thing we can come up with, and then maybe that would make some people think, well, maybe somebody else is hiding it, even from the Air Force. Maybe the Air Force were trying to send us a message that by coming out with such a wacky scenario that they were trying to tell us that there really is a cover-up.
That's a possibility, and again, it's funny how many different stories. I mean, they're up to like story number 5 or 6 now.
Yeah.
With the Roswell phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the interesting things. It's like if nothing weird happened, why keep bringing it up?
Exactly, just leave it be.
Yeah, that was the odd thing about the crash test dummy scenario. It was like, they said they laid it to rest 3 or 4 years early when the mogul balloon story came out. So why then have to make it even more complicated to try and explain the bodies away? That came like in 97. The mogul balloon story came in 94. It's almost as if they feel the need to keep coming back to it and addressing every little point, which to me strongly suggests, if not undeniably suggests, something very strange happened at Roswell.
Yeah, no kidding. Nick, look, we're almost out of time. Before I do let you go for the evening, because I know that you've been on here for about an hour and a half now with us, and your time is precious, my friend. I do want to have one favor from you, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. And this is something I ask of all my guests. I want to know if you can supply the show with a small bumper.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, and what I would need from you is for you to say the following phrase. And you can improvise, by the way. I give everybody. And you should have heard Kathleen Martin last night. She was fantastic at this. But you can improvise a little bit. But the basic gist of what I want you to say, and this is going to be used for promotional stuff for this episode, I want you to say, this is Nick Redfern, author of The Real Men in Black, and now I'm a voice inside the jackal's head. And you can improvise.
Say that last bit. Say that last bit again.
And now I'm a voice inside the jackal's head.
Oh, and now I'm a voice inside the jackal's head.
Yes.
Okay.
Now I'm going to mute myself so you have the air all to yourself. Here you go.
Hi, this is Nick Redfern, author of The Real Men in Black, and now I'm a voice inside the Jackal's head.
That was perfect, my friend. Thank you so much, Nick.
All right.
And amazing having you on. Now, I want to, before I do let you go, I want to give you the next few minutes here to tell everybody how they can get a hold of you and how they can get a hold of these books. I highly recommend, of course, the UFOs and Aliens book. I've been talking about it for days and days and days. I highly recommend this Real Men in Black book to everybody. So please tell the audience that's listening in how they can get these books.
Okay. Well, all my books are available at, normal bookstores, Barnes & Noble, etc. And you can also order them from Amazon. And I also have links to all the books at my blog, which is http://nickredfernsbooks.blogspot.com. There's no www, that's just http nickredfernsbooks.blogspot.com, and people can contact me there. I'm always happy to chat with people. I'm not one of these snobby authors who just doesn't reply to emails. I always like to try and get back to people in 24 hours. If they got questions and or just want to chat about cases or whatever. I'm always happy to do that. And for people who are interested more in the Men in Black mystery, I'm actually speaking at a conference called the Conscious Life Expo, which is the final Saturday in September and the first Sunday in October, so September the 30th, October the 1st, in Los Angeles. And so if you Google Conscious Life Expo, I'll be doing a workshop at that conference all about the book and different cases and what to do if you're confronted by the Men in Black, etc.
Now, is there another book in the near future for you, Nick? Are you going to be working on another book pretty soon?
Yeah, I've actually got a new book out in December, and it's called Keep Out. And it's basically,
oh, cool.
It's a study of government secret installations, not just in the US but around the world, that have ties to UFOs. So there's a chapter on Area 51, a chapter on Hangar 18, a chapter on the stories of the underground base at Dulce, New Mexico, a chapter on the Russian Area 51. So in other words, each chapter is a standalone chapter on a secret government base that's linked with UFOs.
Very cool. I'm going to have you back on as soon as you have that book out.
All right. Well, I'll make sure the publishers
I'll
make sure the publishers send you a copy of it. So.
Definitely. Thank you so much for being on here tonight, Nick. And look, there's one caller who's trying to get on with you. So before we let you go, let's see if we can squeeze one more question in here. Caller, turn off the radio, and you're on the air with Mr. Nick Redfern on the Jackal's Head. Before we let him go for the evening, you have the last question of the day. Go for it.
Just turn the radio off. I just want to say thank you for coming to the show. It was really great. I appreciate your time.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks a lot.
And I'll be checking in your books and your website.
All right. Well, if you want to get in touch, just feel free to, and I'll be glad to chat or whatever. So. Things, Angel, about the whole Men in Black mysteries. I actually don't think there's just one category of Men in Black. I think there could be several things going on. And, I mean, in the book, I think I include 5 or 6 different theories that people have presented, as to who they might be. Now, in terms of, when you talk about the movies then, there's absolutely no doubt, that some Men in Black reports can be traced back to government agencies. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Right.
And, certainly back in the 40s and 50s, government agencies like the FBI, they were dressed in sort of the black suit and the fedora-type hat. And so in that respect, I'm sure that's where at least part of the, sort of the mythology behind the reality, if you like, has stemmed from. But there's also a weirder category of Men in Black as well, where the witnesses describe them as looking sort of very, very strange. They're sort of, only about 5 to 5'5" tall, very pale skinned, almost, anorexic looking, and they don't seem fully conversant with our mannerisms and, ways, etc. And people describe them as having this particular type of MIB, wearing these large wraparound sunglasses. And then when they kind of see them up close and they kind of peer at these sunglasses, it looks like they've got either oddly spaced or in some cases bulging eyes, as one witness described them as thyroid eyes. So in other
cases, other than anything related to ufology, like in ghostly activities or anything like that, or is it all mostly related to UFO cases?
No, it actually isn't. I mean, I would say the majority of the reported cases that we have deal with some aspect of the UFO phenomenon, whether it's like a UFO sighting or the person has been involved in abductions or something like that. But there are cases on record. I mean, I guess the most famous sort of non-directly UFO-related events in which the MIB was seen was in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the mid-'60s at the height of the Mothman sightings. Now, some people have said, well, Mothman is directly connected with UFOs. Other people have said, it's more like a paranormal creature, described as like this shadowy, glowing-eyed winged creature that turned up in Point Pleasant in the 60s, and the sightings culminated with the collapse of the Silver Bridge in the town, which collapsed into the Ohio River, literally killing dozens of people who were stuck on the bridge at the time. And, some people sort of see Mothman's presence as having been the cause of the deaths, if you like, and others sort of view Mothman as like a warning figure that turns up when disasters are about to happen and kind of tries to warn people. But regardless of which, scenario or theory is correct, or if it's even a combination of the two, the interesting thing is that when the Mothman sightings were at their height in Point Pleasant, attacked by some sort of weird creature and drained of blood, etc. And the following day after these attacks occurred, he said that a man and a woman turned up. Bear in mind, he lived on like a small farm out in the middle of, pretty much like on the fringes of the El Yunque rainforest in Puerto Rico. So very much like a rural little village type area. And he said this man and woman turned up, both in black suits. He was in sort of black suit and tie. She was in like a black, businesswoman suit, that sort of thing. And they were very sort of cold and unemotional, pale looking. And bear in mind, this is Puerto Rico. It was like 100 degrees. This was the height of the summer. And they literally turned up on his doorstep in these black suits, not showing any evidence of sweating, or there was no car there either. That was the weird thing. It was like they'd sort of just appeared or, out of nowhere. And she looked just like it. She was like pale, skinny, and didn't smile. And they asked all these sorts of questions about the attacks on the farmers' animals, and what did he think of it, and then they just, when they were satisfied, they got all the answers. They just turned around and left, and literally just walked out of his off his property, and the last he saw of them, they were just walking towards a little village that he lived in. And that's just like one example.
That's amazing.
But the Women in Black reports, in that respect, they're pretty much identical to the Men in Black stories.
Now, let me ask you: are the Men in Black or Women in Black seen?
It's basically a study of the entire Men in Black mystery. I'm sure a lot of people, their sort of first perceptions are sort of based around, the Men in Black movies with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. Not realizing, certainly as far as the general public's concerned, but many of them just aren't aware or realize that as people in the UFO field will know, that the movie itself was sort of inspired by real life reports of encounters with the Men in Black, which are, described as these sort of dark-suited, sinister characters who go around silencing and menacing people in the UFO field, and have done for sort of 60-something years. So what I tried to do with the book was sort of present the history of the phenomenon and demonstrate the various cases that point in various different directions as to who they might be, and also demonstrate it's very much an ongoing mystery. It's not, as a lot of people think, just something from the 40s or the 50s. It's still very much happening today.
Now, is this phenomenon, do you think, alien, or is it like in the movie where it's humans that are just government workers? What do you think really is going on here, Nick?
Well, I think one of the interesting words, this category seems independent from the government angle, and there's actually a number of files that have surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act where government agencies like the FBI and the Air Force had issued memos in the 50s and 60s ordering their agents to find out who these weirder Men in Black were, because even the government didn't seem to know. So that kind of suggests there are like several branches, if you like, of MIT.
Yeah, in the book you also touch on the fact that they could be time travelers also. That's a possibility as well. So yeah, really there's no one classification of what the MIBs are. Now, there's also a reference to women in black. Are there reports of women also be seen, or that are seen dressed in black, and how many reports of that have we've had over the years?
Yeah, I mean, that's an aspect, I guess, that most people don't have any knowledge of. The idea,
right?
But it's I guess it's logical. Why would it just be men in black? Why would you not have women in black?
Right.
And certainly the number of reports that we have on file are less. But, the interesting thing is they kind of follow the exact same path, if you like, where I'll give you an example. I've done a number of expeditions to Puerto Rico looking for the chupacabra. And when I went there in 2005 with a friend of mine from Canada, a filmmaker named Paul Kimball, one of the people we interviewed was a rancher whose animals had been